couldn't make it in the basement because the water was up to the steps. It was unbelievable. To wake up and see that, it was like we're living in a horror movie. It was terrible.
It smelled like sewer. And the water, when the water went down, it was black on the floor. It's really sad.
I had 4 to 5 feet this time, which was the worst. It knocked out my furnace, my hot water heater, my wash machine, my dryer, my upright freezer, gone. I just need help.
Detroit's most recent storm has been called a 100-year flood. Due to climate change, disasters like this are on the rise. The United Methodist Church believes people are stewards of God's creation and acknowledges the reality of our global climate crisis. So I am driving to Detroit to see the effects of Earth's warming temperatures firsthand.
In my work with the West Ohio Conference, I coordinate disaster response ministry, and I have seen a marked increase in the number of disasters happening around the world. Detroit has had multiple floods in recent years, so we hope to meet with churches and individuals who are making urban areas more resilient to climate change.
After 3.5 hours on the road, we walked around downtown Detroit to get a feel for the area. Here, the Detroit River is all that separates the U.S. from Canada, so Detroit was a major stop on the Underground Railroad. And, during segregation, manufacturing jobs made the Motor City a popular destination for people migrating north from the Deep South. Today, this continues to be the largest predominantly black city in the country. We relaxed along Detroit's famous Riverwalk, where Mary Ellen couldn't resist stopping for a few selfies along the way. Looking out at the beauty of the river, it was strange to think people do not take better care of the world we live in.
I set up a video call with a climate resilience expert to help us understand how humanity's disregard for God's creation is causing climate change. Shanna, I'd like to start from the beginning. What does the phrase climate change really mean?
When we speak to climate change, what we're referring to is the science on how climate is changing due to human activity. Primarily, it's through the burning of fossil fuels like oil, coal, and natural gas that releases heat-trapping emissions.
The Great Lakes region is a land of plenty. With fresh water and moderate temperatures, it's not the kind of place you would expect to experience climate change. So why is it happening here?
The lake surface temperatures are getting warmer, and what this is leading to is less ice during the winter season. And it's also meaning that there's more summer evaporation. That means more water is going into warmer air. And we know that warmer air can actually hold more water. So in some of these areas like the upper Midwest and New England and a few others, we're seeing extreme precipitation events on the rise due to climate change.
I've heard Detroit's experience this summer referred to as a 100-year flood. But Detroit has had two 100-year floods in just 7 years. What is a 100-year flood?
For folks like me, the flood policy nerds or other people, it's a bit of a misnomer because it misrepresents what the actual 100-year flood is. It's easy to think that would happen one in 100 years, right? So some people think it's never going to happen to me. That's way off into the future. But the reality is that it's actually a probability. And what it means is there's 1% chance of this type of flood happening in any given year. So hopefully that helps homeowners or people who are renting to really understand, the risk of a 100-year storm or 100-year flood.
Obviously, it's hard to pin any specific flood on climate change directly, but I think most people can see there are more storms than there used to be. What makes scientists so sure we are bringing these kinds of disasters on ourselves?
Climate change, unfortunately, is already happening now. This is science that we've known about for quite some time, and we've warmed the planet from pre-industrial levels to today, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're already seeing the impacts of that additional heat. We're seeing extreme heat events during the summer that tend to be getting longer. We're seeing droughts getting more intense and getting longer. And with flooding, we're seeing more extreme flooding and heavy precipitation events. It's causing widespread impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people. This is all due to climate change. And, if we don't do anything today to reduce these emissions, we are going to see these types of impacts increase into the future. So we really need urgent action to reduce the burning of fossil fuels.
Following Shanna's call for better stewardship of the planet, we heard about a church in downtown Detroit that has found a creative way to reduce the use of fossil fuels. We met with Reverend Faith Fowler, who introduced us to solar-powered tiny homes.
Cass Community Social Services works with people, what we say, in areas of concentrated poverty, which is a third of the city of Detroit, unfortunately. We have a big emphasis on sustainability because people living in poverty get hit first and worst with a bad environment. So making the houses good for the planet also made a bunch of sense to us. They are smaller houses. They're cheaper to build, they're cheaper to operate, they're better for the environment because they use less resources. People are paying $1 a square foot in rent. Many of them had been homeless or incarcerated. They moved in with nothing. So by the time these folks own the homes, they should be worth $70,000, $80,000. Their only other bill is electric, and because we have solar arrays on each home, in the summer that array reduces their electric bill, and everything in the house is electric, to $9. I think the church should be dedicated to doing things that are good for the planet. All of Scripture opens with the scenes of God creating the heavens and the waters and the animals and people, and it's not our planet. The more we can do for the planet, the happier we make God, I believe, and the stronger the witness we have. I think it sends a message to the larger world that using renewable energy is good for everybody, and maybe even especially the poor.
The Tiny Homes program makes Detroit a little bit more resilient to climate change by using less coal-powered electricity than traditional homes. Renewable energy sources expel fewer of the greenhouse gases that are contributing to the region's rise in severe storms, which sets Detroit up for a brighter future. Yet, for now, scientists expect the floods to keep on coming, along with the destruction they leave behind.
The United Methodist Church has a global reputation for disaster response. To gain an understanding of the damage caused by a flood, we set up a video call with Dan O'Malley, who helped coordinate relief efforts in Detroit. Dan, tell me about the cleanup that volunteer teams are doing as we speak.
Well, this particular type of flooding event has happened multiple times, but this one's by far the worst. And in most cases, it's sewer backups. The storm and the sanitary are not always separated. So when that contaminated water backs up in people's basements, anything that's down there has got to come out. For a lot of people, that means a lot of their belongings, stored treasures that they're going to have to part with, which is always difficult. And then the whole process of getting those contaminated items out of the basement, out to the street for pickup. Some of the younger people can take care of those things themselves. Some of the older people, they're not going to be able to do much, and they're going to need a lot of help.
What are some of the things that need to be done before a home is safe to live in again?
In general, there would be finishing and coordinating mold remediation. In addition with that is getting contractors in and determine which part of the electrical system needs to be replaced, such as the receptacles and switches, those type of things. And then look at, is their water heater still working? What about their furnace? And so it's a process.
What's one thing that people should keep in mind if they ever need to go through this process of recovering from a flood?
The one that's usually missed is after the recovery is looking at how do you prevent or minimize the next one. And many people are so happy to get back into their homes that they forget that there could be another one, another flood. And that preparation for the next one is critical.
In 2021, disaster relief teams were stretched so thin by the number of extreme weather events around the country that Detroit had a hard time finding enough volunteers. But we got in touch with an early response team who drove from Columbus, Ohio to the state up north to help out. That's what I call loving your enemies. The team allowed us to go with them to see why they do this work.
My favorite part of ERT trips is reaching out to help people who I don't know, making those connections into communities where I never would have gone before. I used to do mission trips when I was in high school, and I absolutely loved it, and I knew that I always wanted to get back to it. I just knew in my gut that this is what God wanted me to do. Early response team cleanup with flooding primarily is what we call mucking out. That involves taking out anything that's been damaged by flood waters. That could be everything from drywall to just appliances, furniture, anything that typically is in a basement. And then as we're leaving, the last thing we always try to do is spray for mold so that we're doing the best we can to try to control the mold that's still there. Most of the jobs are jobs that a lot of people can do. I would really say that there's just so many more rewards than there are challenges. We're like a family, and I absolutely love each and every one of the members of our group, and we have really formed a tight bond in the things that we do. I love it that we're all in this together, and we're hopeful that we can just spread that into a community that's just experienced something terrible.
This is a water line that came in from the flooded basement. When you have flooded basements, we need to take all of that water out, get rid of the soot, the sewage, anything that is bad that would cause mold to grow in it. That needs to be removed for the safety of that homeowner or the people living there. I've been doing disaster relief work for about 8-9 years. This gives me an opportunity to use these hands to rebuild and help others in need that have been hurt by a disaster.
A lot of people get left behind, and we're there to help those who are. It's emotional work. It's very important work. It's heartbreaking. You don't have to be a professional. You just have to be willing to sweep, shovel, clean, just be a helper in any way that you possibly can.
I literally had no knowledge of how to use tools or anything like that, but I learned quickly. They were very patient, great teachers. And you just find that there's things that you can do. You can haul out trash, you can sweep floors, you can scrape, you can paint, you can pull nails. So there's something that everybody can do.
Believe me, you do not have to be a handyman to do it. I mean, I don't know specific skills, but there's always someone to teach you, and you do learn. And in a lot of situations that we go to, we need to just talk with people and let them tell us their story. It's wonderful to be able to connect with the homeowners. They're so appreciative, so grateful.
The biggest deal that we try and do, or the most important part of what we do, is to provide a caring Christian presence, a presence that says that somebody from somewhere cares. We don't call people victims, we call them survivors. The work is strenuous. It just takes a special kind of crazy. And I think we've also seen just some really awful situations where there was 8 feet of water in these people's basements. So there's just a lot of damage, and it's also heartrending to see people seeing everything they own taken out to the curb. To me, this has been a real gift to be able to be active in this. And I think it's just really an honor to be able to walk into somebody's house who we don't know and they don't know us, and build a relationship of trust and go in and do some hard work.
Early response teams provide much needed relief in the wake of a disaster. And as the Earth continues to warm, more and more people will experience the damage caused by severe storms. But some communities will be hit harder than others.
The wealthy politicians and business owners whose policies drive climate change rarely feel the effects of it as directly as people who live in poverty. I am sitting down with Jenny Phillips to find out why poorer neighborhoods get hit first and worst by events like floods. Jenny, across the country, how does poverty impact the risk of suffering from natural disasters?
Poverty is a huge factor in increasing risk, because folks who are experiencing poverty are living close to the edge of disaster on a normal day. Folks in the community who are already struggling with housing issues, economic challenges, and poor infrastructure where they live are extra vulnerable when that flood or lightning storm or tornado comes through. It's loading crisis upon crisis. So it's natural disasters compounding social and economic disasters, and together they create a huge amount of risk.
You mentioned poor infrastructure. Here in the Motor City, as well as in other urban areas, what things have led to the water and sewer systems getting so outdated?
One is that the climate is changing very quickly. Another is our stormwater systems in many communities were built decades ago, and they weren't built for the current conditions. And then you have this larger picture where communities with a lower tax base, because people are lower income, tend to receive fewer resources to enhance resilience and ensure that folks are prepared for these types of challenges.
We followed an early response team into the Jefferson-Chalmers area of Detroit. Down there, a water pump actually failed and contributed to the severity of the disaster. So that leads me to my next question. Why don't city leaders just fix the infrastructure?
It seems obvious, doesn't it? Because when it is such a crisis, when people can't rely on stormwater infrastructure to handle the increased water that's coming into our stormwater systems, why wouldn't we do that? I think it's a combination of things. These types of projects are long-term projects, they're very expensive projects, and it is really hard to get the ball rolling so that these long-term projects get started and keep moving. It's a real challenge for a lot of municipalities.
Around Detroit, people are beginning to install what's called green infrastructure, which uses natural processes to slow stormwater down. How can green infrastructure help communities become more resilient to climate change right now?
There are a lot of things that we can do to build resilience through green infrastructure, like having strong tree ordinances that shape how and when folks are allowed to cut down trees, and also catalyze people to plant more trees, because we know that trees are essential both for keeping a place cool and for contributing to greater stormwater management. Similarly, supporting communities in things like figuring out how individual homeowners and landowners can integrate stormwater management into their properties through bioswales and other types of infrastructure. And again, how can we incentivize that type of behavior? We just need to go to the basics of how our natural environment already has the tools it needs to be able to build resilience in cases of storms, floods, and those types of hazards.
In recent years, the city of Detroit has been working to improve their stormwater system by adding green infrastructure. One of their chief engineers took us on a tour to see some of the projects. We talked about both the possibilities and the limitations of what the city can do.
We use historical information to tell us how to move forward. We don't have data that really shows us how to move forward and what we should be designing for. It kind of looks like, what we become accustomed to as a 100-year storm might end up being a 10-year storm. And this is what it looks like when you talk about climate change. There's no simple solution. This is not going to happen overnight. What makes green infrastructure a piece of that puzzle is that green infrastructure can manage those small 90% events, what we call the 90th percentile. It's that inch of rain that may fall here and there. We put our first projects in the ground 2015, 2016. Since that time, under my leadership, we have put more than 16 projects in, and those projects manage more than 60 million gallons of stormwater annually. The project that we're at right now is on the site of a elementary middle school. We're managing all of the roof and the parking lot, so it's about 5 acres. There are going to be 2 retention basins that have the ability to hold about 150,000 gallons of stormwater, but it's all going to discharge to the Rouge River right behind us, and we're going to remove 4 million gallons completely from the combined sewer system. We've been able to accomplish a lot in these short 5-6 years. I'm proud of the team, but there's a lot more we're going to try to figure out if we can do. And each homeowner has a little part that they can play in doing something, and we're going to do what we can from the public side to, reduce the likelihood of you flooding. I can't ever say 100% unequivocally, without a doubt, there won't be a bigger storm.
To go along with the city's efforts, we visited the homes of people who are installing green infrastructure in their own backyards. The Rain Gardens to the Rescue program helps individuals do their part.
Well, Friends of Rouge has been working to teach people about rain gardens for decades now. Rain gardens are gardens that are designed to collect and store rainwater. It's that simple. We're mimicking nature, so we're using nature-based solutions for these problems that we have with flooding and a lack of habitat.
I think everybody should have a rain garden in their yard. I like being able to see the flowers bloom, to just be able to look at the window and to post it on my garden club that I created about rain gardens and vegetable gardens and community gardens.
I felt like installing a rain garden would add beauty to our block and the idea that it would be protecting our watershed. I care a lot about the water in our region, love the Great Lakes, and in general care about sustainability. So to have the opportunity to do something beautiful, do something in community is really exciting. It just was so much more than I expected.
A lot of my Detroiters have said after they get a rain garden in their yard that the garden changed their lives. I'm like, I never would have expected that to come out of somebody's mouth just because they got a rain garden. But it helped reconnect them to nature. It provided them a way to de-stress. It improves our mental state as well as our physical state. It's just a win-win-win.
While individuals can play a role in slowing stormwater, even more can be accomplished when communities work together. The Greening of Detroit organization hosts multiple community events to plant trees throughout the year. So we went back to the Jefferson-Chalmers area to help slow flooding and make Detroit a little greener.
The Greening of Detroit was started in 1989 as a volunteer-led tree planting organization, and our mission today is really to rebuild Detroit's tree canopy and increase the quality of life for and with Detroiters through workforce and adult programming and youth programming. Green infrastructure is very important. What it is using the land's natural systems to manage very specifically stormwater, but it has so many multiple benefits, from providing aesthetic amenities for people to habitat for wildlife. We really focus on rebuilding the tree canopy. It's just one way of a suite of ways of managing stormwater. We know through leaf vegetation, through the root system, the trunk itself, it's slowing water down and it's helping to absorb water.
Trees give life to the community. The animals around the trees preserve nature. Trees give shades to individuals, to their vehicles, to the houses. It's good for the property, for the value of the community. Trees serves a lot of purposes.
I know that Detroit used to be a very tree-filled city, so I feel like it's important right now more than ever due to climate change to make sure that we have trees for a healthy community, a healthy environment. So I felt like this was a perfect way to spend my volunteer day to help give back to Detroit.
I was born and raised in Detroit, and I remember when we used to have trees. I remember climbing in trees. I used to pick apples with my mother. And that was the best apple pie you could ever get. It was a family thing. That was the most happy time. To me, it was good memories.
I think most people really like trees. So I would encourage anyone who's interested to come out to the nursery for a volunteer day or come out to a tree planting in the spring or the fall. You can find them on our websites. And if you don't live in Detroit, you don't have to plant a tree with us. You can plant a tree wherever you are or work with other organizations that are doing this great work around green infrastructure.
Roll in and let go. Perfect! We did it. That looks great.
Our trip to Detroit opened my eyes to a new reality. For most of my life, the effects of climate change have seemed like a problem for the distant future. But that future is here. Warmer temperatures are bringing heavier rains and more extreme floods to places as insulated as the American Midwest. At first glance, the greater number and severity of Detroit's storms might feel like the wrath of God. But experts say the suffering caused by these storms is not God's fault. It is ours. Humanity's disregard for God's creation is causing severe destruction that disproportionately affects the poor. Urban areas can become more resilient to the age of climate change. But it is a race against time. For the people of Detroit, who have already gone through 2 historic floods over the last 7 years, it means developing alternative forms of energy, cleaning up after more storms, and updating old systems. So churches are teaching people to use renewable energy with better efficiency. Teams of volunteers are working side by side with local leaders to clean up and repair the damage. The city itself is developing green infrastructure and working to improve their stormwater management. Individual residents are installing rain gardens to do their part. And communities are coming together to plant trees that make the city more green. But all of these initiatives take time. Now, one question remains. How long will it be before the next 100-year flood?